Chapter 4. As the dark figure moved closer, his features remained hidden in shadow. He looked to Melissa, grasping the bedsheet with both hands, choked with fear, as if he had no features at all. No features, no face. His head, his arms, his whole body came out of the shadows, and were now part of the shadow. And that shadow was moving forward, arms raised, to engulf her. "Melissa, what on earth?" Her father burst into the room, stumbling over her sneakers, which she had tossed by the door. He caught his balance and fumbled for the lamp switch. "He's in here, Daddy! He's in here!" Melissa managed to cry out, in a tight voice she didn't recognize. Finally, the light came on. Her father stood against the wall, his face filled with confusion, frantically looking around the room. "Where, Lissa?" "He's here! He's—" "Who?" Seeing no one, her father started to breathe normally. He walked over to her bed and slumped down on the edge. "Daddy, he—" "I don't see anyone." "What happened? Why did she scream again?" Mrs. Dryden came into the room. She was still dressed, hadn't even taken off her shoes. Melissa climbed out of bed. "I'm not crazy. Someone was in this room." Mr. Dryden stood up and walked quickly to the window. "Did he jump out the window?" He looked out, leaning far over the window ledge. "Wes, don't lean out like that," Mrs. Dryden called, clutching at her throat, frightened. He pulled his head back in and turned to Melissa, who was standing right beside him. He shook his head. "I don't see anyone." "Who is in here? A man? What did he look like? Call the police, Wes." Mrs. Dryden walked over to the window to pull her husband to the phone. "How can I call the police? There's no one here." He looked skeptically at Melissa. He disappeared," Melissa said uncertainly. "I saw him. He was as close to me as you are. I saw him clearly. I didn't make it up. I wasn't dreaming." "And then he disappeared into thin air?" Her father pushed his glasses up on his nose. I don't know." "Well, what did he look like? Can you describe him?" her mother demanded. "Well, he—" Melissa's mouth dropped open. She pulled absent-mindedly at a curly strand of hair as she thought. "It was too dark," she said finally. "I couldn't see his face. I could just see—" "What? What could you see?" her mother asked. "I could see that he had long hair." "And?" "That's all," Melissa said quietly. She knew it sounded stupid, but it was the truth. Why were they doubting her? Why wouldn't they believe what she was telling them? Couldn't they see how frightened she was? Her father walked over to comfort her, as if reading her mind. He hugged her. "You've got to control your imagination," he said softly, smoothing her hair with one hand. Last time was a tree branch," Melissa said, becoming impatient with them and letting it show in her voice. "Tonight was real." She pulled away from her father and walked to the window and sat down on the windowsill. The night air felt cool against her back. "If he was real, where was he?" Her mother just wouldn't let up. "Why can't you describe him?" "I told you, Mother," she said angrily. "It was too dark. I could only see his outline. He raised his arms, he moved toward me, and then Daddy came in." "And he just vanished into thin air?" Mrs. Dryden shook her head. "It's just the excitement over your birthday, the new car. It all caught up with you, that's all. It's perfectly understandable." "Please, Mother, don't talk to me like I'm a baby." "Come on, Lissa." Mr. Dryden held out his arms. "There's no need to be angry at us." "You don't believe me, do you?" Melissa snapped. "Well, no," her father said, glancing at her mother. "I think this is all power of suggestion." "What?" "I think the stories about the Fear Street Prowler have upset you enough to think that you're seeing him in your room. I believe that you really saw what you said you saw, but I think your mind was playing tricks on you. I think—" "That I'm crazy?" "No, of course not," her mother broke in. "Let me make you some warm milk. It will make you feel better. It will make you feel sleepy." Melissa sighed. There was no way she was going to convince her parents that she wasn't imagining the shadowy intruder. "Good night, you two," she said wearily. She gave them a tired wave and climbed back into bed. "I'm feeling calm now. I'm sorry I disturbed you." Her mother started out the door, looking very troubled. Her father followed, but stopped at the doorway and turned back. "Shall I close the window? Will that make you feel better?" Melissa shook her head. "The breeze feels nice. It's the first cool night we've had." "Shall I turn off the lamp?" "Yeah, thanks. Night, Daddy. Night, Mom." They muttered good night and walked out into the hall. A few seconds later, Melissa could hear her parents talking about her in their room across the hall. She stared up at the ceiling. It seemed to be glowing, pale yellow from the light coming in through the window. "I'm wide awake now," she thought. "Wide awake. I'll never get to sleep tonight." She sat up, then climbed out of bed. It was so bright in her room. She didn't remember the streetlight being that bright before. The breeze blew the curtains into the room, allowing even more light in. Impulsively, she walked to the window and pulled the curtains to the side. The air felt so refreshing, so soft and cool. Resting her hands lightly on the window ledge, she leaned out. It was such a clear night she could see all the way down Fear Street. Through the trees that lined both sides of the narrow street, she could almost make out the jagged outlines of Simon Fear's burned-out old mansion at the far end of the street. Melissa's friends were always telling her terrible stories about Fear Street, but she loved the neighborhood. Her parents loved antiques and rambling Victorian houses and anything old and interesting, and they had passed their enthusiasm on to Melissa. Fear Street is by far the most interesting street in Shadyside, she thought. Looking up, she saw the full moon. It seemed just a few yards above her head. Its pale light reflected off the silver pendant around her neck. She lifted the pendant and stared at the shimmering moonlight in it. How beautiful, she thought. She dropped the pendant and stretched farther out the window, leaning on both hands. What was that scampering across the grass in a yard across the street? Was it a rabbit? I better get back to bed, she thought. I'll be totally wrecked tomorrow. But as she started to straighten up, she felt two powerful hands on her back. Before she could resist or cry out, the two hands shoved her hard from behind, shoved her with startling, almost inhuman power. Chapter 5. The hands pushed hard against her back. She would have sailed out the window if she hadn't made a desperate grab for the sides of the window frame. Gripping the frame tightly, she regained her balance and pushed back, resisting the steady force in her back. Her attacker shoved even harder. The hands felt so cold on her back. The air felt so cold. She sucked in her breath and pushed back with all her might against the wooden window frame, resisting the attack, refusing to fall. Gathering all her strength, she whirled around and turned to face him. There was no one there. She stared into the darkness of her room, panting loudly, each breath a cry of pain, of terror, of relief. Where are you? She thought. Where did you go? How did you disappear so quickly? He must still be in the room. But where? He had no time to hide, to duck out of sight. Instead of feeling calmer, she felt the fear begin to grow. Her legs trembled. She felt sick to her stomach. She was covered in a cold sweat. Hey, I know you're here, she called, her voice a choked whisper. Somehow she made it to the bed and turned on the lamp. Her eyes started quickly around the room. No one was there. I know you're here. On trembling legs, she walked to the closet and slid open both doors. No one. She could still feel the cold on her back. She could still feel the hands pushing her with such force, with such evil determination. I know you're here. She dropped to the floor and looked under the bed. No one. Should she call for her dad? No, he would only come running in to find the room empty once again. She'd get those looks again, those looks from both her parents that said they were starting to think there was something seriously wrong with her. Well, was there? Was she cracking up? She sat on the carpet and leaned back against the bed. She stared up through the open window at the yellow full moon. I almost went flying out that window, she thought. Someone tried to push me out that window. I didn't imagine it. I didn't dream it. I'm not cracking up. Still feeling trembly, she pulled herself back into bed. She drew the covers up to her chin and waited for the shaking to stop. There's no one here, she thought. I'm safe now, perfectly safe. A few minutes later, she fell asleep with the light on. When a cold shadow drifted up to her bed and hovered over her, she didn't awaken, didn't see it. Buddy tossed a rake onto his driveway, then a long-handled broom and a shovel. Look out, he warned Melissa. He heaved an unopened bag of potting soil out next. Why are you throwing that stuff around? Melissa asked, making her way across the drive and into the garage. I'm not throwing it around. I'm throwing it out of the garage. Why? So I can carry it all back in. That's called cleaning the garage. Didn't you just clean the garage a few weeks ago? She moved aside as he tossed a wooden basket containing garden trowels and pruning shears onto the drive. Yeah, but my dad said I didn't do a good enough job. I wasn't thorough enough. So today, I'm being thorough. You're tossing everything out then bringing everything back in? Yeah, but neatly. Look out! He tried to heave a rolled-up garden hose, but it unraveled and he had to drag it out. He dropped it into the wheelbarrow and returned for more stuff. He was wearing a stained, plain white t-shirt and faded jean cutoffs, white tennis sneakers with no socks. He looks great, Melissa thought. You should keep that tan all year round, she said. He laughed. Yeah, maybe I'll go to one of those tanning places every week and barbecue myself. He picked up a large bag of fertilizer and carried it out to the driveway. You didn't notice that I'm wearing your pendant, she said, running her hand over it. Sure I noticed. He wiped the sweat off his forehead with his arm. Go on with what you were telling me on the phone earlier. She grabbed the handlebars of his bike and leaned against them. Nothing more to tell. There was someone in my room, and my parents both think I'm crazy. She waited for him to say something, but he only picked up an aluminum ladder and started to carry it past her. You think I'm crazy too? He didn't answer until he had carried the ladder out. set it down on the grass, and walked back in. Maybe it was the wind, or shadows or something. Shadows don't push you out windows, she snapped angrily. She shoved the bike against the wall, turned, and crossed her arms over her chest. I'm not crazy, buddy. He put down the crate he was carrying and went over to her. He put a dirty hand on her shoulder. I'm just trying to figure out what it could be. Me too, she said, moving out from under his hand. And what about the birthday presents? I just keep seeing them all ripped up like that. Who could have done such a stupid, horrible thing? He shrugged. I don't know. I'm kind of frightened, she admitted. It's all too weird. You have to chill out. What's that mean? She snapped. Then she realized she had no reason to be angry at Buddy. He was trying so hard to be sympathetic and understanding. Sorry, she said, nuzzling her face against a sweaty shirt. I just wish they'd catch that Fear Street prowler. I keep thinking he's going to come climbing in my window, and... What makes you think he'll come to your house? I don't know. I have such weird thoughts sometimes. I think maybe he's already been in my house. Buddy shook his head. Oh, right, for sure. He climbed in the window, opened all your birthday presents, and left. That makes a lot of sense. She playfully pushed him away with both hands. Thanks for all the support. I've got to run. Where to? I promised Stella I'd meet her at the mall. I have a little money. I thought maybe I'd buy some clothes for school. School? Don't remind me. Only a few more days of freedom. I'm kind of looking forward to it, Melissa said, stepping carefully over all the stuff strewn in the drive. Aren't you? Huh? And give up all the excitement of cleaning out the garage? Get real. See you later. What time were you picking me up? He scratched his forehead, leaving black streaks across it. Hey, why don't you pick me up? You're the one with the awesome car. She laughed. I knew you were going to say that. Okay, pick you up at 8, if my car is fixed and out of the garage. She climbed into her mother's Volvo station wagon and, feeling a little cheered up, gave Buddy a farewell wave, but he had already disappeared back into the garage. That looks great on you, Della said. She reached over and squeezed the material of the wine-colored sweater. It sort of fills you out. What's that supposed to mean? Melissa asked, frowning at herself in the full-length mirror. Stop being so sensitive, Della said, picking up the same sweater in light brown. I'm a very sensitive person, Melissa said in a highfalutin, pretentious voice. You're also skinny as a rail, Della said. Melissa shot her a dirty look. What do you think of these? Chrissy asked, stepping out of the dressing booth in a pair of straight-legged black corduroy jeans. Chrissy had bumped into Melissa and Della just outside the clothes closet and invited herself to tag along with them. She tossed back her wavy black hair and made her way to the mirror to examine herself. They're tight enough, Della said, rolling her eyes for Melissa's benefit. They look great, Melissa told Chrissy. Maybe a size smaller, Chrissy said, studying herself from every angle. You'd be arrested, Melissa said. All three of them laughed. A serious-looking salesgirl across the store looked up to see what was so funny. Chrissy admired herself a while longer. You think these are too sexy? You're just fishing for a compliment, Melissa said, laughing. No, they're not sexy at all. You're lying. I think I'll buy 2 pairs. Oh, wow, she said suddenly, pointing to a girl who had just entered the store. Do you believe what that girl is wearing? Are those plastic pedal pushers? I think they're fake leather or something, Della said. She disappeared into the dressing booth with an armload of clothes. Chrissy couldn't get over the girl across the store. And look at that tacky top with the fringe. Oh no, I don't believe the white plastic boots. Hey, I know her, Melissa said, watching the girl go through a stack of faded jeans on the table. Her name's Mary Lou. I forgot her last name. She was at my day camp when I was little. Someone should send her to camp in that tacky outfit, Chrissy said. Melissa didn't laugh. She's just poor, that's all. Huh? What do you mean? Don't you know what poor means, Chrissy? It means she doesn't have much money. Her family lives over in the old village. She has a whole bunch of brothers and sisters. She probably can't afford nice clothes. Being poor is in bad taste, Chrissy said, and then laughed at her own joke. Not funny, Melissa said disgustedly. I don't ever want to be a rich snob who turns up her nose at people. Save the lecture, Chrissy muttered, heading back to the dressing booth. I'm sorry, okay? Melissa followed her. We're so lucky that our parents are well off, she said, but it's just luck. You and I didn't do anything. We didn't earn it. Really, Melissa, if you want to give a sermon, why don't you go to church? Chrissy jerked the dressing booth curtains shut. Melissa realized she might have gone too far, but she meant what she had said. Sometimes she felt really uncomfortable having so much more than other kids. She wondered what those other kids must think of her, how much they resented her for being so lucky. A few hours later, she was thinking about all this as she drove home. After dropping Della off in North Hills, she headed the Volvo wagon down Park Drive toward Fear Street. I'll have to apologize to Chrissy, she decided. I had no business lecturing her like that. I'm just so edgy these days. You're overtired. That's what her mother would say. Melissa laughed to herself, but her laugh was cut short by the whispering sound. Again, the sound of air whispering her name. Melissa. Oh, she cried out. Melissa. No, not again. What on earth could be making that sound? The station wagon suddenly felt cold, the same chilling, damp cold she had felt in her new car. Melissa. And suddenly, there he was in the passenger seat beside her. A young man, probably about her age, tough-looking, with black, greasy hair down to his collar, and dark, dangerous eyes, dressed all in blue denim. Melissa cried out and crashed the car into the car ahead of her. Chapter 6. The driver of the car Melissa hit, a large, middle-aged man in a gray business suit, came storming out of his car, red-faced and angry. Melissa, somewhat stunned, didn't move until he tapped on her window, 3 hard taps with the back of his hand. She rolled down the window but didn't get out. Weren't you watching? The man asked, his face growing even redder. I was stopped for the light. Sorry, Melissa said, starting to feel a little more normal. Are you okay? Why didn't you stop? The man demanded angrily, ignoring her question. Are you stoned or something? He stared at her, examining her eyes. No, I just didn't see. This boy popped up beside me, and I was so surprised. Boy. The man leaned down to the window and peered past Melissa to the passenger side. She could smell his aftershave, which was sharp and sweet. What boy? Melissa turned to the passenger seat, then raised herself up so she could see the back seat. There was no one there. Hey, where are you? She cried aloud. Where'd you go? She turned back to the man. I'm sorry, he was here, really, and... He threw up his hands impatiently. I can't listen to this nonsense. I'm late for a meeting. He left her window to go examine his rear bumper. Melissa reluctantly pushed open the car door and stepped outside. She felt a little shaky from the jolt of hitting the other car. She took a few steps and began to feel better. Your car isn't even dented, the man said, rubbing his chin, his face still nearly tomato red. And what about your car? Melissa asked, thinking about the boy with the long hair. The boy looked so tough, so angry. She could see that even in the brief glimpse she got of him. Have I seen him someplace before? She wondered. Just a scratch, the man said, getting down on his knees to look under the rear of the car. I guess we're both okay. My parents have insurance. He climbed to his feet and dusted off the knees of his trousers, even though they were clean. No need. Let's just forget about this, okay? He smiled for the first time. His face started to return to normal color. He stretched and rolled his head around. Neck seems to be okay. Guess we were lucky. I guess, Melissa said doubtfully. I'm really sorry. You're being so nice about this. I'm a nice guy, he said flatly, getting back into his car. Do me a favor, though, okay? Drive behind someone else from now on. Oh, sure. Melissa wasn't certain if he was joking or not. She watched him pull away, thinking about the long-haired boy. She could see him so clearly, his dark eyes, his nervous frown. She couldn't have imagined him. Hey, move it. Melissa looked up to see 2 cars behind her, the drivers poking their heads out of their windows. Hey, miss, are you okay? Didn't you hear us honking? Startled, she jumped into the station wagon, pulled the door closed, and drove away. She hadn't heard the horns at all. She hadn't heard anything. I was in my own world, she thought, my own dream world where boys appear and disappear, and the wind whispers my name. I'm really worried about you, Lissa. You're obviously extremely... No, I'm not overtired, Mother. Melissa tore a piece off her roll but didn't eat it. She hadn't intended to tell her parents about the car accident at dinner, but during a long silence, she had just blurted it out. Now she was really sorry she had told them. This young man you say you saw, her father said thoughtfully, wiping sauce off his chin with his dinner napkin. Did he look like the young man you claimed you saw in your room last night? Don't say claimed. Why'd you have to say claimed? Melissa shrieked, sounding more angry than she intended. You really think I'm crazy, don't you? You think I'm some kind of nutcase? Claimed? Claimed? That's the kind of thing you say to someone in one of your court cases, Daddy. I'm not your client. I'm your daughter. She knew she had gone too far. She couldn't help it. It was so infuriating that they both refused to believe her. Calm down, dear. Try to eat. Mrs. Dryden hated scenes of any kind, especially at the dinner table. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... Her father pulled off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. His eyes looked so much smaller with his glasses off. He suddenly looked very tired. Your dad had a really good idea this afternoon, Mrs. Dryden said to Melissa, finishing a last piece of salmon on her plate. Here she goes, changing the subject again, Melissa thought. For once, however, Melissa was relieved. Why don't you tell her? Mrs. Dryden urged her husband. Mr. Dryden swallowed a mouthful of scalloped potatoes. Excellent dinner tonight. Remind me to compliment Marta. I hear you. Thanks for the compliment, Marta called through the closed kitchen door. Mr. and Mrs. Dryden laughed. Marta probably thinks I'm crazy too, Melissa thought gloomily. Go ahead, tell Melissa your idea, her mother urged. Well, your mom and I have to go to this lawyers' convention, Mr. Dryden started. It's next weekend in Las Vegas. We're leaving Thursday night to make it a long weekend, and I thought maybe you'd like to come too. It'll be really good for you, her mother said quickly, before Melissa had a chance to react. You need a change of scenery. School doesn't start until the following week, so it's the perfect time to go, and... I really don't want to, Melissa interrupted. Well, we really think, her mother started. Why not, Lissa? Mr. Dryden asked, very disappointed. I just don't want to go all the way to Las Vegas with a bunch of lawyers. It wouldn't be any fun for me. What would I do while you and Mom are in your meetings and going to parties? I'm not old enough to go to the casinos. I'd have to hang around the hotel waiting for you. But Melissa, Mrs. Dryden argued, there's tennis and swimming and all the shows. I really think you'd have a great time. You need to get out of this house. Sorry, Melissa said, tossing down her napkin and getting up from the table. No way. No thanks. Where are you going? Mrs. Dryden asked, not bothering to hide her anger at Melissa's refusal to accompany them. I have a date with Buddy. I'm picking him up. He'll be so surprised to see my new car is back. Impulsively, she leaned over and gave her father a quick kiss on the forehead. Thanks for picking it up for me, Daddy. He smiled up at her, a forgiving smile. I really think you should reconsider, Mrs. Dryden called. Melissa didn't reply, but hurried up to her room to get changed. She showered quickly, then put on a red, ribbed sweater with fringe along the hem and a new pair of jeans. She was putting Buddy's silver pendant around her neck, struggling with the clasp, when the boy appeared beside her. He seemed to be off balance at first, but he quickly got his bearings, and his dark eyes stared into hers. She could see him clearly now. He had dark brown hair that looked as if it hadn't been washed in weeks. It was parted haphazardly in the middle and hung down past his collar. He had thick, dark eyebrows, high cheekbones, and a mouth that seemed to fall naturally into an unpleasant sneer. He was wearing a faded blue denim jacket and blue denim jeans. To Melissa's surprise, she wasn't frightened this time. This time, she felt only anger. Who are you? She demanded, taking a step toward him. He seemed surprised by her boldness, but didn't reply. He looked her up and down, being very obvious about it. You made me dent my mom's car, she said. He shrugged his narrow shoulders as if to say, Who cares? So, you can just buy another one, right? He said bitterly. His voice was higher, softer than she'd imagined. Who are you? She repeated, staring back at him, refusing to blink, to back down. How did you get in my room, in my car? Her anger seemed to amuse him. He looked past her to the window. Then he walked over to her dressing table and stared down at her makeup and the other items. You don't remember me. He stepped toward her again. No, why should I remember you? She asked, feeling the fear return. You should remember me, he said, rushing forward and pushing his face up close to hers. You should remember me. You killed me. Chapter 7. She backed away from him and tripped on her sneakers and fell over backward. He put his hands on his hips and smiled down at her, obviously enjoying seeing her helpless on the floor like that. She saw that he had tattoos on the back of his right hand, but she couldn't make out what they were. Let me up? He sneered again. Get up. I'm not stopping you. Melissa rolled to the right and jumped to her feet. They stared at each other across her bed. I've never seen you before, she said. He tossed his head, then smoothed back his greasy hair. Convenient memory, he muttered bitterly. I don't know what you're talking about. Stop being so mysterious. He seemed to find that very funny. I'm not being mysterious. I told you flat out. You killed me. Take a good look. Remember me now? You're crazy. If you're dead, how can you be standing here now? What are you, a ghost? What should she do? Run from the room? Call for her father? No. She wanted some answers from the strange intruder. She wanted to find out what was going on once and for all. Don't play innocent. He turned his back on her. You mean to say that you killed me and didn't even notice? You mean you're so rich that... I didn't kill you, Melissa screamed. If I killed you, how did I do it? His hands coiled into fists. He remained with his back to her. I don't remember, he said in a flat, emotionless voice. Most of my memory is gone, but I know one thing for sure. You killed me. That's ridiculous, Melissa cried. Tell me the truth. What are you doing here? Why are you trying to scare me with this ghost nonsense? How did you get in?" "I'm dead," he said, turning around. His angry expression had softened. His eyes were watery. "I'm dead because you killed me." His words chilled her. He wasn't joking. But what he was saying was impossible. "You're as alive as I am," she cried. She walked over to him, reached out, and grabbed his arm. Her hand seemed to go right through him. All she felt was a wisp of cold air. "Oh no," she cried, covering her open mouth with her hand. She stepped back. Her heart was pounding now. She felt cold all over, chilled inside and out. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. He smiled, a grim smile. Her horrified reaction seemed to please him. "You believe me now." You're a ghost." She wanted to run, but her legs were trembling. She felt weak all over. She slumped down onto the bed and stared up at him. "Now you believe in ghosts," he said, his smile fading. "Isn't it amazing how a few seconds can change your life? Or end it?" "But I know I didn't kill you," Melissa insisted. "It isn't something I'd forget, you know." "You did." He pulled out the chair in front of her dressing table, turned it around and sat down on it, leaning his chin against the seat back. "I can't remember how, but you killed me." "Huh? Why did I kill you?" Melissa asked. He'd be good looking if he washed his hair and stopped sneering like that, she thought. "I don't remember," he said with some sadness. "What's your name?" "Paul." "Paul what?" "I don't remember." "Huh? You don't remember your own last name?" "I told you, I don't have much memory. Death screws you up in a lot of ways, you know." "Oh, how would you know?" He slammed both hands against the chair back. They didn't make a sound. "I keep fading in and out. I can't control it. I can hardly remember anything." "If you have no memory, what makes you think I killed you? You're haunting the wrong house, Paul, and that's the truth." He shook his head. "No, it's one of the few things I do know. You killed me, Melissa. I do know one other thing, too." "What?" "I know why I've come back." He stood up and started toward her. "I've come back to pay you back. I've come back to kill you." "No!" She jumped off the bed and started backing toward the bedroom door. He's crazy, she thought, totally crazy. I've got to get away. He stared into her eyes. "Scared, huh?" "Yes," she admitted. "Good. You should be. You finally got wise." I'll scream." "You screamed before. It didn't do you much good. And it won't help much to run away either. You can't run from a ghost, Melissa. Haven't you seen any horror movies?" "You're making a big mistake, Paul. I didn't kill you, really." She was only a few feet from the door. If she backed up a few more steps, she could be out of the room and down the steps. But what then? "You've got to believe me," she said. "I never knew you. I've never seen you. I couldn't have been the one. It's all a big mistake." He didn't say anything, just shook his head, staring coldly at her. She realized she was shivering all over. It was freezing cold in the room. The sudden cold last night, the sudden cold in the car. He brought the cold. He did it, she realized. She backed up and bumped into the wall. He moved quickly. Before she could get through the door, he was right in front of her. He raised his arms to block her path. His face was inches from hers. He was so cold, so terribly, sickeningly cold. "I didn't do it, Paul." Her voice came out, choked and small. "You're a liar," he said quietly, and his handsome face suddenly turned quite ugly. "A rich liar, and rich liars have to die."